Good. Right. Well, I think it's time to start. So may I say hello, everybody. Welcome to PAI and to our webinar, a single version of the truth about rebuilding confidence in institutions through better information. I hope you're all keeping well. My name's Claire Cameron. I've seen some familiar names in the participants list, so hello to you and hello to everybody. And we've got a very wide range of countries represented, which is wonderful. You may know that PAI is a London-based consultancy and training organisation, and we specialise in strengthening governance worldwide. Our webinar today is just an overview of some of the underlying principles of good information management. And of course, very topical because we're all seeing very vividly through this pandemic how important information is for governments. We've been relying on the statisticians, scientists, and how important it is for us all. So I'm really pleased that our colleague Neil McCallum, Records and Information Specialist, is here today to talk us through and discuss with us some of the issues about good information management and how that can help to drive building back better, I think is a phrase I've heard a lot these last few months, our institutions. And Neil, I think you're going to be joined by our colleague Tanya Karlbach, also a Records and Information Specialist. So in a moment, we'll hand over to you, Neil. And just to say that, again, Neil and Tanya are both workshop directors with us at PAI. One of the annual programs we run is on effective records and information management. So when you finish your presentation, and I think we're happy to take questions, and we can take, you can register questions throughout. But I'll stop there and I'll hand to my colleague Amanda, who's going to just talk us through how the software works for this webinar today. So over to you, please, Amanda, and I'll rejoin at the end to say my thank yous. So thank you very much for now.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this Records webinar. I'm going to run through some quick admin points with you. On the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see several boxes. You'll see a questions box, a polls box, a chat box, and a handouts box. If you have any question throughout the webinar, please use the questions box for that. We will be launching a poll during the webinar, so please do participate on that. If you would like to chat amongst yourselves or talk to us trainers, please use the chat box. And there are handouts in the handouts box. So there is a copy of the slides and also some marketing material from us. What I will do now is I will hand this over to you, Neil, and we can begin the webinar.
Excellent. Thank you very much indeed, Claire and Amanda. And thank you, everyone, for being with us. Just to check, Amanda, can you just send me a quick message to make sure you can hear me okay? And that we're all right, and we'll get started. I will assume that you can, because I'm sure you'll let me know if you can't.
I can certainly hear you, Neil, although
excellent.
I'm not the most important one. This is Claire back again, but Amanda is confirming that we can. So
brilliant.
That's all good.
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And as Claire has said, we have people registered from, I think, over 25 different countries from all over the world. And I think that's a reflection of how important for all of us this issue is. The title, as you see, is a single version of the truth, and I'll be talking about what that means for us and what that means in general for the world at the moment. So you have met Claire, you've heard from Amanda. Denise is also online from PAI and will be supporting us at various points If you have any issues at any point, do raise them in the chat box and do use that to communicate with the colleagues who are joining us from around the world. On previous events, we found the chat box has really been incredibly valuable in giving people the opportunity to share experiences and to pass on good practice from one to another. And as Claire mentioned, we're also joined by my colleague Tanya Karbach, who in particular will be here to help with questions. So questions, put them into the questions box as we're going along, and we will pick them up at the end if we haven't already as we're going along, and we look forward to a good debate and a good discussion about that. What we're going to talk about, and I'm going to try and keep this to 45, 50 minutes, so we've got time for questions, is what's the context for thinking about information management systems now? What is it we're trying to achieve? Why is it so hard? What can we do about it? And I'm going to make some suggestions about the way ahead. How we're going to do that is I'm going to discuss these issues. We are going to have a poll. We're going to flag up a few key principles. We hope that you'll be using the chat room. We'll have questions and answers, and we'll end with a review and potential for further discussions. So, why is this so important now? Well, there are various expressions that people have been using to sum up how things are over the last couple of years, and the pandemic has made this more dramatic, but this is a trend that we've seen really for at least the last 5 years. People have talked about a post-truth world. My opinion, with no evidence whatsoever, is as valid as yours, even though you may have lots and lots of statistics to back it up, because kind of truth and facts, do they really matter as much as they used to? And we see with some governments, I would suggest perhaps many governments, a move away from evidence-based policymaking, i.e., let's find out what the facts are and let's work out what we need to do, to policy-based evidence finding. I know what we want to do. Now go and find the evidence to prove that we're right. And of course, if there is an expression which has really captured all of this over the past 4 or 5 years, it is fake news. And it is so easy to dismiss anything you don't like as fake news, and so hard actually to demonstrate that what you're talking about isn't fake news. And that's why I am so attracted to this idea of a single version of the truth. Now, sadly, it's not my expression. It's one that's been around for a little while, particularly focused in information management. But it is the objective that everyone in an organization is accessing the same and the most recent information on any given topic. And practically that means keeping all of an organization's information in a single centralized database or in a distributed but synchronized set of databases, so that if you and I are in the same organization and we need to find out something, me looking at it in the UK and you looking at it on the other side of the world will be seeing the same piece of information. It's about ensuring that an organization's information is shared, it's consistent, it's reliable, it's accurate, it's authentic, and it's up to date. So that when we're asked questions like, what happened? When did it happen? Where did it happen? How many was there? Why? The basis on which we give our answer is the same basis. Our opinions may differ, our interpretations may differ, but the basic facts upon which we're building those opinions are not in dispute. Here is a little example, and this is a real example. How many pieces of personal protective equipment can you see in this picture? Now, the answer can be 1, 7, or 10. It all depends on how you choose to define it. You might say, actually, personal protective equipment is about protecting the whole person. So that is one set of equipment. And the objective will not be achieved without any bit of that there. So you might say, okay, that's one set. We're going to call that a set. That's how we define the unit. You might say, well, no, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different things there. Or you might say, well, I want to interpret these as completely individual units. So whereas you might see 2 pairs of gloves and a pair of overboots, I'm actually going to say each pair of gloves is 2 units of PPE. And each boot is an individual unit of PPE. And I might want to do that because I want to prove that we have been very, very successful in obtaining equipment. So by definition, just how I count this, I can make it look as though we haven't achieved 7 units, we've achieved 10 units when we're talking about exactly the same thing. Now, there is no right and wrong, but what really matters is that we're doing it consistently and that we have a common set of facts upon which to base our ideas. So we just need to agree how we are counting things, and how we define something is a fundamental principle of information management if an organization is to be able to exploit it effectively. Recently, Barack Obama, promoting his first volume of his autobiography, gave this statement. He talked about a common set of facts, and he said, I think at some point it's going to require a combination of regulation and standards within industries to get us back to the point where we at least recognize a common set of facts before we start arguing about what we should do about those facts. That is exactly what we're talking about. And it is particularly relevant that he uses this expression, a common set of facts, but also that he talks about a combination of regulation and standards, because that's what every organization needs if it's to manage its information properly. Now, I'd just like to ask a little bit about our participants so that we can focus what we're going to be saying over the next 30 minutes or so to make it most relevant. So Denise has just launched this poll, and I'm asking you what you're most interested in. Is it A, enhancing your existing system, B, making the case for a new system, C, improving information security, or D, improving retrieval and storage of existing data? Now, I realize, 1, there could be a lot of other things on the list, and 2, you might be interested in more than one of those things. But if there is one thing which particularly you are hoping to get out of this short session together, if you just let me know, then we can try and tailor what we're going to be talking about to meet most people's needs. So if I could just give you a moment or two to respond to that. Okay, our colleagues are still voting, so I will just give you a little bit longer to do that. Okay. Amanda, can you see the results?
I can indeed, so I will show the results to everyone. From the looks of things, answer A is the top at 33%.
Excellent. So A is 33%. Could you just run through the percentages for the others, please?
I can indeed. So B is at 20%.
Right.
C is at 27%. And D is at 20%.
Okay. Thank you very much indeed, Amanda. Thank you.
That's okay.
Right. So we've got a range of interests. Key to achieving any of them is acquiring the resources you need and managing how you deploy those resources to achieve those objectives. And we'll come back to these and talk a little bit more about them. Okay, I've been doing this stuff for quite a long time. As you can see, I even had hair then. And it doesn't really matter whether we're talking about paper-based systems or electronic systems, fundamental principles remain. And I'll touch more upon that in a moment. I've also worked on this around the world. That's erecting some shelving for a new information system in a prison in Ethiopia. And wherever these systems are, we are trying to achieve the same thing, getting the right information to the right person at the right time at the least cost. Now, you can see all sorts of definitions of records and information management, which will be far more all-embracing. But in essence, that's what the job is. The right information, what the person needs to get to that person and only to them or only to people who should have access to that information when they need it, as cheaply and efficiently as possible. That's all we're trying to do. We understand the paper world. We have had paper around for a very, very long time. And this is an image of the Doomsday Book, written in the year 1086. In the UK, it's basically a tax register, a land ownership register. You can see this if you go to our National Archives, and that will be around for as long as the National Archives survives, because it will be cared for, and we understand how to do that. Basically, if we just look after the paper that it's printed on, we will be looking after the content of the record as well. And we know how to do this. And this is pretty simple stuff. It's so much more complex now in terms of the technology and the storage. So there you can see, I don't know how many pages that's got. Let's say that's, 400 pages of text. And that's a big, heavy book. In the devices which we're using all the time, and we're all using multiple devices, we are storing vast amounts of information. We're creating vast amounts of information in a range of different ways, without any of the old-fashioned paper-based concepts. And that gives us wonderful, wonderful power to communicate. I mean, as we're doing now, this is an incredible thing that so many of us from all over the world can be together thinking about the same thing and communicating about it in this way. But it carries issues which we, if we are interested in managing information, need to be thinking about. Not least, the massive amount of information we can store on these things. A 1 gigabyte flash drive can hold the equivalent of 300 books. 254 gigabyte, 76,000 books. Now, I looked up on Google Images a picture of 76,000 books. And this is what I found. It's from the Indian Express, and sadly, it relates to a library which flooded, and 76,000 books needed to be cared for. But just think of the sheer bulk of 76,000 books, and then think about the little flash drive down in the corner. The fact that in your pocket, you can carry the equivalent of all of that. You can drop that down a drain. You can lose that so easily. And that raises new challenges for us all. So why is managing organizational information so hard? There are a number of reasons that it's particularly difficult these days. One of which is, as we've just touched on, the ever-expanding range of communication technologies. That is coupled with an increase in decentralization, both of organizations and indeed of nations and governments and processes. So the old idea of a central point, as we talked about right at the start, with a single version of the truth, one central point which holds everything is really quite rare these days. It used to be the way every organization functioned. Backlogs. Now, a number of our participants are from a judicial and court background. Backlogs of cases are a problem in virtually every jurisdiction. I say virtually because I don't know every jurisdiction in the world, but every jurisdiction I've ever had anything to do with has a problem with a backlog of cases. That has grown exponentially because of the pandemic and courts being closed, and then having to work in very different ways. So we have a big problem with the sheer backlog of things we have to do. And that is an information management problem, as well as a service delivery problem. Our style of working is different. I am sitting in my home right now doing this, and many of you may be too. Home working has become a norm in many countries. It is something that, again, is not new, but the extent of it has dramatically increased. That raises questions about information security, not least because it means that people are accessing the organization's information from a range of different locations, but also because the barrier between what is personal and what is organizational or official is dissolved in this situation. And that raises a number of challenges for us. And this is a rapidly changing world. This is a cartoon that I saw just a couple of days ago, which tries to capture just how different things are this year from last year and previous years. We've moved a few things around. The librarian or the bookseller is saying, travel books are now in the fantasy section. Politics is in sci-fi, and epidemiology is in self-help. Good luck. Now, whilst that's a comment on the way life has changed, it's also a comment on how we define what is part of what, and that's a key function of information management, changes over time. And this is an expression of ours, and it's a bit harsh, but I think that it is often true. We are trying to use 19th century structures to manage information generated through 21st century ways of working. Many of our basic records information principles and assumptions have not changed very much, and the principles don't need to change very much, but the structures do. And many organizations, and again, I would be tempted to say virtually every organization, is playing catch up, is trying to catch up with the rate at which the technology is changing and the ways of working are changing. And all of us, I am sure, have done parts of our jobs on our personal email accounts, on WhatsApp, and on a range of technologies where information which should and would in the past have been captured into an organizational system is being shared on platforms which can't relate it back to the organization. So that relies upon us remembering to do so. And of course, we've all got far more important things to do. So tends not to happen. So what can we do about it? Well, people talk a lot now about information assets. And I think this is a really good way of thinking about an organization's information. Many organizations don't value their information adequately and don't recognize what a critical asset of the organization it is. So to have structures like defining an information asset owner in the organization, who is akin to the director of finance or the head of HR, who takes overall responsibility for the management of either all of the information in the organization or a subset of it, to have a register so you actually know what information the organization has, to have policies, processes, and adequate and relevant security. And again, we could spend the whole hour talking about information security, but this is a good example where often in organizations, the threat which the system is protecting against is not actually the most significant threat to information security. And I'll be happy to talk more about that if that's something that will be interesting when we get to the end. There are standards, and SO 15489 is the standard for the creation, capture, management of records, and how they're developed, records metadata, record systems, all of these things. There are standards which you can look to, against which you can measure your systems to consider how effective they are and where are the priorities for improving them. What's great about the standards and about the basic principles of this area is that the principles and the standards apply regardless of the structure of the information, the form that it is in, the type of business it relates to, the technological environment, or the time when it was created. And that makes this a very powerful thing. And again, happy to talk more about that. And we talk about something which we call information-enriched decision-making. And all this is exactly what Barack Obama was talking about. It's actually about having the information available to actually make informed decisions. And very often, particularly in public sector organizations, people are making decisions under time pressure without the adequate information available to make that decision in the most informed or information-enriched way possible. So an organization needs to be information-enriched if it's to develop, deliver, and assess its policies and programs and services. if it's to make informed choices between policy options, if it's to provide openness and accountability, if it's to protect its rights and legal obligations, and if it's to preserve its organizational memory. And among the many dramatic changes that have taken place during my working life is the fact that the organizational memory of many organizations has been decentralized, fragmented, and thus has disappeared when the individuals who hold that bit of the memory leave the organization. And this is a challenge, as all of these things are. So what we need to do is to have an information management program that includes these things: policies and procedures. And I think that's now probably the third time you've seen policies and procedures. You may well see it again. I make no apologies for that, because those are the fundamentals. People whose responsibility for this area is clearly defined: resources, systems, learning and development, and monitoring and evaluation. And I'll talk briefly a little bit more about each of those. Policies and procedures need to be clear, precise, and allocate responsibility. And they need to specify what constitutes an organizational information resource, and to define roles and responsibilities for looking after that resource. Now, I will talk at the end about where you can get help and support. You can find excellent examples of clear, precise, short policy statements on the internet from various organizations on which you can model your own. But the key thing is to define roles and responsibilities and allocate those to people who understand that that's their role, that it's a serious role and responsibility, and they have the competence, skills, and support to complete and fulfill that role. The kind of people who need to be involved are the senior role, like the information asset owner that we talked about before. The staff resources are allocated to this area of work. Duties are clearly defined. People have the knowledge, skills, and experience to fulfill those duties, and that there are promotion routes within this area of work. Sadly, in a number of organizations and a number of countries, the main aim of anyone working on records and information management is to get out of that area and go and do something else. To value the asset, to value the work, and people can see that there is a valid an effective career path within this area of work, is fundamental to professionalizing the activity. Resources, we need adequate space, facilities, system support, and investment in this area. And for all four of the areas we talked about in the poll, particularly with enhancing existing systems, you need to define what it is that's needed to enhance those systems and to win the argument to get the investment. And no one is going to pretend that's going to be easy, because this is not a glamorous area of work. This is not a high priority for many organizations. And many think, well, we've muddled through so far, what can go wrong? We'll do it one day. There are ways of building the case, and I'm happy to talk more about that as well when we get to the end. But there is a need to get proper investment, both financial investment, but also intellectual investment, that people are willing to think about this in senior management. When we talk about systems, there are still around the world a significant number of paper-based systems. Obviously, increasingly, systems have become and are becoming digital. Many organizations run hybrid paper computerized systems. Key to all of these is adequate system security. And again, often investment in system security is placed on part of the system, but not consistently through all of the system. And again, happy to talk more about that. Learning and development, there needs to be general awareness training. We need to build specialist skills among those who are going to have particular responsibilities for managing information. The importance of information needs to be included in induction training, and there should be continuing professional development for information professionals to continue to update their skills and to remain current. And we need good monitoring and evaluation of the systems. And this is an area where you can have a real impact. Monitoring and evaluation, we want to think about the efficiency of the system, the effectiveness, but also the economy of the system. We want to be able to review processes, identify problems, and address weaknesses, and to create key performance indicators, things like service level agreements, performance standards, and measures. And one of the pluses about working in this area is it is much more easy to measure what is happening than in many other areas of organizations. And when we're looking to make an argument for greater investment in existing systems or enhancing information security, measures and taking regular measures and monitoring performance can be very, very powerful. As to can baselining and making comparisons with external organizations who are like you. And many organizations have a rival. Many countries have another country that they consistently compare themselves to. And that can be a powerful argument to say, well, they seem to be able to do it in half the time it takes us. Why are they so much better than us? And those are arguments that access resources in a way which sadly, perhaps more logical arguments don't. I put these two quotes in, both of which say pretty much the same thing. When you have that window of opportunity called a crisis, move as quickly as you can. Get as much done as you can. There is a momentum for change that is very compelling. And Einstein here is quoted as saying, in the midst of every crisis lies great opportunity. And I hope it doesn't sound cynical to be talking about exploiting the grim situation we are in now, but this is actually a moment of opportunity. And as Claire said in the introduction to this, we can all see that the incredibly fast development of vaccines are about statistics, are about brilliant scientific research, but it's also about managing information and keeping good records of what's happening. So there is an opportunity for us. And if normal service delivery in your organization or in your sector is interrupted because of social distancing, the need to restrict access, etc., this may be a good time to think about the internal housekeeping issues, like enhancing the information system. So if you are thinking about grasping this opportunity, then the question every organization should ask itself is, do we have adequate control over our information to support ongoing activities and to provide accountability? The only point of having information in your organization is because it helps you to do your job, or it provides accountability because you have to demonstrate how you've done something, or the law requires you to keep that information. And any organization which says, yep, we are totally sure we have adequate control, probably needs to look again. Because if you think that is true of your organization, do let me know in the chat box. I would love to learn more about your organization, because I think we can all improve in this area. So what can you do? Well, these are they sound basic things, but they're really, really important. And very few organizations are able to actually answer these questions. The first thing you can do is actually know what information you've got. And that sounds almost patronizing in being so simple. Very few organizations really know what the totality of their information assets are. And this has got worse in recent times rather than better. You need to know not only what you've got, but where it is, and then ask yourself where it should be. And where it is may often be on Gmail and Yahoo email accounts that people are using to conduct official business. You need to know who can access that information and who should be able to access it, how long it takes to retrieve, how reliable it is, and then ask yourself, what do we actually need? And when you've answered that question, the things that you do need, value them. My colleague, Tanya Karlbach, who is with us and will be with us for the questions and answers, and I did some work some years ago now on the introduction of freedom of information in an organization. And this organization had been around for more than 100 years. And they were a prime example of an organization which is regarded as a very effective one, but which had absolutely no real idea of what their information holdings were. And we spent a long time working with them on this question of what it is they actually need. But basically, particularly in a access to information, freedom of information environment, you really want to reduce the pool of information you're holding to what you actually need, because it just makes life so much easier. We found that for them, and this will be true for many organizations, the information holding actually could break down easily into three parts. One, stuff which they had no need of whatsoever, which was long out of date and should have been disposed of decades ago, and that can all go. Two, information which could be in the public domain because it has no security problems about its release. And that reduces to a much smaller amount the information which they actually need to do their job, to maintain accountability, and which they have to be able to search through for any freedom of information inquiries. So what do you actually need? And once you've reduced down to what it is, then value that stuff and look after it. So you can also ensure that existing policies and procedures are being implemented. Now, I know that I said that many of these may be outdated, but I've also found that for many organizations, if the existing policies and procedures were actually being followed, many of the problems that are being experienced simply wouldn't be happening. They may well need to change, but you'll only really know that if people are actually following them. If people aren't following them, how can you tell? So ensure that existing policies and procedures are being implemented, and then identify which need to change and work on the change process. Where can you get help to do that? Well, there are plenty of sources for help. There is learning and development, and this is a program which PAI ran in Montserrat, and I think we have someone from Montserrat with us, so you may well recognize some faces there. That's probably 2-3 years ago. Courses, studying, online courses. There's lots of learning and development around that you can access. Obviously, some of it you need to pay for, but it's surprising how much is available free as well. Consultancy and advice, and again, we do that through Public Administration International, but there are other organizations, and I've included a picture of a partner organization of ours, VirtueSync, which provides similar support in West Africa, in India, many countries. There are professional associations, and I've merely picked two here, the Information and Records Management Society and the Institute of Information Africa. There are many, many more. But these are professional associations, are incredibly valuable for networking, for accessing resources, and I strongly recommend membership of a professional association. And as I've said, there's a lot of free resources around. I've merely picked three that I know pretty well, but this isn't a quality judgment compared to others. You know, the UK's National Archives has some excellent information management resources. There's an organization called IRMT, which has a range of education and training manuals, which are all available free to download. Now, they're quite old now, but because the fundamental principles don't change, if you wanted to do a self-study program or to offer a self-study program to someone in your staff, that's all there for free. Materials from the US Records and Archives Administration as well. But this will be true of many, many organizations around the world, and also many private sector organizations too. There's lots and lots of free resources around, and do take full advantage of these. So what I'm going to ask as we move towards questions and answers, and I'm delighted to see we've got some coming in already. What do you think is the most effective thing that your organization is doing or could be doing to meet the challenges that we've talked about in this last 45 minutes? And please share those, either make a statement on questions or put them in the chat box so others can see them. And I really welcome your thoughts on effective things your organization is doing or could be doing to meet these challenges. Okay, so that was a very quick run through of some big issues. But let's, Amanda, perhaps we can have a quick look at questions.
Hi, Neil, we can indeed. So the first question is from Eric, and he's asking, is it really necessary and safe for everyone in an organization to have the same version of the truth?
Right. Do I see that Tanya has had a go at answer, has answered that already? I don't want to disagree with what she's probably just said.
She has answered it, but
what did you say?
Thoughts as well.
Right. There are two parts to the question, I think, and it's a very good question. There is an issue about whether everyone in the organization should have access to everything. And the answer to that is no. Access to information needs to be in the interests of the organization. So it should be restricted to people who need that information to do their job, or they need that information to meet accountability requirements, or it is information which could be in the public domain anywhere. The other part of my answer would be, what you don't want is people having access to different versions of the truth. So I should, let's talk about PAI. Everyone in PAI, if they're asked a question about let's say, the number of people who attended PAI programs in 2019. It is in no one's interest for Amanda, Denise, Claire, and I all to give different answers. Now, it may well be that my involvement is not across the whole range of PAI's work. So my answer might be, I actually don't know. And there's no reason why I should know that number. But for the people who do know the number, it's vitally important that they know the same number. So I take the point about information security, but I think there is a critical principle about a fact is a fact is a fact. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Neil. The next question is from Brenda. How do you protect privacy in this digital age?
Okay, Tanya, would you like to say anything about that?
Hi, sorry about that. I was just responding in the chat as well. So Amanda, would you read that to me again? I apologize.
Yeah, of course. How do you protect privacy in this digital age?
Well, I think you probably don't is the easy answer. It sounds terrible, but I think that the conception that we had of privacy even 20 years ago is no longer achievable, sadly. I think the responsibility of a records and information management professional is to make sure that you have in place structures that really limit how much information is collected in the first case, and then very tightly controls what can be shared. In the UK and the EU broadly, obviously, we rely a great deal on the GDPR, and one of the challenges for us in the UK is going to be what happens post-Brexit, the extent to which we will still be able to rely on that very stringent level of control. In other countries, I think that we have this weird idea that governments need to control very carefully, but we blithely hand over to corporate organizations far more data than we would ever be willing to give to somebody in the public sector. I know that sounds really cynical, but I'm just being honest, I think. I don't know if you agree, Neil.
Yes, I think you're right. I mean, I completely agree that the main threat to our privacy is ourselves. And I suspect I know I'm perfectly guilty of this, that, I happily click on, yes, allow cookies, yes, tick that box, don't tick that box, quite carelessly. And it is staggering how much information about us all we are allowing various platforms to collect as the cost of them providing us with, in inverted commas, a free service. Because actually the payment is often our personal information. So privacy is a fascinating area, and I think it will become an ever bigger issue in the coming years. Okay.
Thank you, Neil. I've got one more question, and that is, how do you ensure the government has the truth about you?
Gosh.
Do you want me to?
Oh, yes, please, Tadia.
I just, carrying on from the privacy thing, if you happen to be fortunate enough to be in a jurisdiction where you actually do have data protection and privacy legislation, you can actually make inquiries, requests to government organizations to find out what they have about you and have the ability to correct any information that they hold that is inaccurate. Unfortunately, the right is a passive right. You actually have to proactively use it to make sure that the information is correct, but it is there for you to do that. So there is a possibility to correct, and that does happen. A bigger challenge is getting them to delete information that they have about you that may be accurate. You can challenge whether or not they should hold it, but that's a much harder thing often.
Yeah, I've got nothing to add to that. I think you're absolutely right. Absolutely right. Anything else anyone would like to raise or ask or suggest?
I think that was all the questions we had at the moment, Neil. I don't know if you want to wait a few moments just in case anything else comes in.
I would just say that there were just a few points that came in the chats that might be useful to flag up. Alistair indicated that one of the successes they've had in his organization has been working with auditors to do assessments and reviews of policies and procedures. And from our experience, I would say that's, you know, a really useful thing to do. Most people find auditors quite scary, but actually records and information management professionals, I think, can develop very strong relationships and you have the same objective. So I think that's a very useful thing to consider.
Absolutely, absolutely.
And Charles has just added that, and there's been one or two other points about this, about how you focus training and professionalization. And Charles has sort of indicated that one of the issues is to focus on sort of personal character and organizational values, which might be, I mean, he's looking at remaining competitive, but that's also true in terms of ethics and issues around integrity and truth, I would say too.
Absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. That's a very good point, Charles. And I think the issue around organizational values is a fascinating one. And I think many organizations claim a set of values for themselves, but they actually encourage behavior which reflects a completely different set of values. I mean, to give you a very, you know, perhaps a silly example almost, but many years ago when I was in government service, our department came up with its organizational values, one of which was teamwork. But on our staff appraisal system, and being marked well on that was critical to whether you had a chance of being promoted or not, was individual achievement. So actually, you were rewarded for showing individual achievement, whilst the organization said, well, actually, we really believe in teamwork, but we're not going to reward you in any way or encourage you. We're just going to say we like it because we think it's a good thing. So organizations, I think, need to focus on their values and the way in which information is managed and shared within the organization is a values issue, really. And I think that's a very interesting point. There's a lot to think about there.
Okay, thank you, Neil.
Okay, well, not at all. Thank you all for those. Thank you for participating in the polls, and I hope you found this useful. Before I hand back to Claire and Amanda, let me thank my colleague Tanya for participating. Let me thank Alistair, another great friend, for contributing so effectively as well in the chat box. And let me wish you all the very best for the festive season. Do please let us know what you thought of this webinar, and if you think there are topics related to this, or indeed anything else which PAI could cover in future webinars. I know our colleagues there will be very keen to hear about that. So my very best wishes to everyone. Thank you again for your time, and do keep safe and enjoy this season. Thank you very much indeed. We have just had another question. Would you like me to just answer that?
Okay, so the question is from Brian, and it's, how do we store information electronically in the long term, because the technology for storing information is constantly changing?
Well, you are absolutely right, Brian, and this is a huge difference. You may remember that during the talk, I had a copy of the Doomsday Book. If you're storing stuff on paper, then basically, as long as you keep it out of bright light, you don't let it get damp, then you come back in 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years, it's probably still going to be readable. That is absolutely not the case with information stored digitally. It needs to be migrated over time from system to system. And huge amounts of information has been lost from the 1970s, 1980s, where this simply has not happened. So you need active preservation of this information. And that is about moving it from system to system. All of this is getting easier and easier because we're all dealing with it together. But it needs investment, it needs time, and it needs thought. And this is another good reason why you don't want to be having to do this for a whole load of information that your organization no longer needs, because there is a long-term cost involved in this. But there are methodologies. You can find plenty of information from the resource sites that I mentioned on how to do this. And we'd be happy to talk about it more with you. But it is, people talk now about, active preservation and storage rather than sort of passive storage. And as I say, that involves work, time, thought, and money. Thank you.
Oh. Good, right. Well, where was I? But that's excellent to have a final question. Very, very good points. So I just wanted to say thank you again, Neil, Tanya, and my colleagues Amanda and Denise. Just you can see on the screen there, I hope, some upcoming events. We've got a webinar, free webinar next week on learning and development, one on Parliament, of course, so important the role of parliaments have played throughout this crisis, and that's in January. And then our series of virtual workshops, some face-to-face workshops in Dubai, and hopefully starting from next year, with keeping our fingers firmly crossed, back to our face-to-face workshops, which of course we've not been able to run since March this year. So please keep an eye on our website, and we'll be getting in touch with you and try to keep you up to date with information as we develop more webinars, virtual workshops and face-to-face ones. I hope sincerely that you and some of your colleagues will be able to come and join us here in London or in other venues where we're running things, because they do provide a very good forum for discussion, benchmarking, and a chance to see what's going on in the UK, but also to compare across different countries. The next one on records and information management is not until next autumn, so I really hope that by then we'll be, as I say, back up and running. So just finally again to say thank you so much. Please keep well and keep in touch with us. And thank you so much for joining the webinar today. All right. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.